All right. So good evening, everyone. I'm so excited that we are going to have fantastic grand rounds today. It looks like already over 40 people have joined in. I'm so thrilled. Thank you, everyone, for joining. And today's talk is going to be so foundational to what we are trying to aspire in terms of our strategy to be able to be the academic hub, not only for education, innovation, but most importantly, to have the spirit of organizational leadership and be able to lead the change. And for that, we have a very important guest speaker. But before I introduce the speaker, let me just go ahead and get you situated with the slides so that you can claim your CME and MOC for today's grand rounds. So for today's grand rounds, I'm going to change the display. Okay, you'll have the lecture situated on the YouTube channel, which is very popular. You'll be able to go there and watch this. Again, in any of your colleagues would be interested to watch it, they can also watch it there. And if they go in and within 12 hours do an SMS message to this number, texting to 25661 to 888-816-4893. You can do it now. You can go ahead and text 25661 to the number 888-816-4893. And if you do it within the 12 hours as a text message, you can go ahead and get CME credit, provided you have an active profile in the Rutgers Cloud CME platform. And if you're a physician, you do the step and then followed by you do another step, and that is you briefly answer a quiz that you will take. The link will be again displayed back into the chat box with the room code 2024, future 2024. And if you answer your questions correctly, then you will have your MOC maintenance or certificate points directly credited into your ABIM ID, provided you have that set up in your Cloud CME profile. So the two steps are the CME and the MOC profile, and you can use this scan barcode to be able to directly go into that website as well. With that, I am really excited to introduce Mr. Ralph Gigliotti. He is the Assistant Vice President for Organizational Leadership at Rutgers University of Academic Affairs. And he teaches leaders of how to be leaders. And I was introduced to him about 2 years back. And he has been very thoughtful in the conversations. And during the time of my own journey of understanding what organizational leadership needs to look like, and the toolkits of how do we communicate and bring effective change, it was very important for me to quickly realize that I need to bring these toolkits to our community. But a little bit more about Ralph. Ralph has a distinguished career. He started as a graduate student in 2014 into the Center for Organizational Leadership, and subsequently completed a PhD in communications in 2017, and has had many important leadership roles as the director of the leadership and research. He was also the director of the Rutgers Office of Organizational Leadership, and now, of course, he is the assistant vice president of the strategic programs and the assistant vice president for the organizational leadership right now. But what does it mean? Through this, he's connected with everyone across the entire Rutgers spectrum of universities' offices. So he provides executive leadership to the programs, particularly guiding different people and leaders on how to be able to be effective in their academic vision and strategic visions. He's a he's a consultant with the president and also the chancellor's office. He is in multiple strategic initiatives, particularly, more importantly, he is contributing to the Rutgers strategy for the medical school merger, and is really playing a very important role therein. going through his CV was amazing. And I was taken aback by the number of books he has written. He has 7 books he has written, and one that caught my eye, which is coming very soon, is the post-crisis leadership, resilience, and renewal and in the aftermath of disruption. So I thought that the title was very interesting. So, and I think each one of us will recognize what it means. He has got 31 papers, 16 book chapters, many lectures, many editorial news articles, white papers, blogs. He's also grant funded from NJACS, an American Medical Association, and he has about 25 awards for all the work that he has done so far, which includes Hall of Fame and Excellence in Teaching attributes. And with that, Ralph, the floor is yours, and I'm really looking forward to how our community is going to react. And I'm really excited today is it's not just cardiology. I've also been able to invite people from hospitalist medicine and internal medicine, because I think we are on a continuum of work here, right from preventive cardiology and hospital and internal medicine to our extreme subspecialization and super specialization. So and our trainees and our colleagues here are in a such a amazing journey here, and often the spirit of innovation creates disruption, and but also creates opportunities of how do we think through the processes for our own benefits. So with that, Ralph, the floor is yours.
All right. Well, Dr. Sengupta, thank you so much for the kind and warm introduction. And it's such a pleasure to be with all of you. I want to begin tonight with a few foundational items. The first is that these remain unsettled times, times that are highly divisive, highly polarized, and I feel that regularly in the different consultations and engagements I'm engaged in across the institution. Secondly, these are unsettled times and leadership matters. We just conducted a co-led team science study of the New Jersey Kids Initiative, and our publication was accepted into the Journal of Clinical and Translational Science, looking at these different scientific working groups to better understand what makes some of the better, more effective, more high-performing working groups more effective. And wouldn't you know, one of the key findings in this study was that leadership matters. In fact, the impact of the leaders of these working groups was a greater contributor of individuals wanting to continue with these projects than a whole host of other variables we were testing for. And the third piece is that leadership matters. These times are unsettled, and each of you on this call are likely juggling a whole host of responsibilities and complexities, especially for those of you that work within Rutgers and across Rutgers and in partnership with the health system. We wear often many different hats. So, with the diversity of the audience, I was trying to think about how best to situate my remarks for this evening. And I want to focus on the fundamentals. So, for some of you, this might be a little simplistic. This might be a little duplicative of content that you've already been introduced to. And that's by design, because I want to level set here. And I want to share some concepts and some strategies that I have found particularly useful as it relates to the theme of today's presentation, which is communication concepts and strategies for team, departmental, and organizational effectiveness. So I'm really honored to be with all of you today. And as Dr. Sengupta noted, my research interests really look at the intersection of leadership, communication, and crisis in higher education. And I often joke that working at Rutgers is a lot of fun because it gives me lots of opportunities to learn about leadership, communication, and crisis in higher education as we're navigating lots of different audiences and stakeholders. And I continue to be in awe of what I've learned and what I continue to learn from colleagues like Dr. Sengupta, and others across our great institution. So that's a little bit about me. And I want to cover some content with you all today around three different areas of focus. The first, principles and practices of high performing teams. Second, what are some of the linkages to communication and this concept of psychological safety, which many of you may have been introduced to at some form or fashion. And then I want to share a diagnostic that we often use in our office at Rutgers when we're working with academic units, trying to better understand what's going on here. What are some of the challenges they're running up against, and what are some of the factors that might be contributing to issues related to team and organizational effectiveness? I'm going to spend about a half an hour or so on my formal remarks, and I want to be sure to allow time at the end for questions, conversations, and reaction from you all. So let's start first with this notion of teamwork. I'll give you a moment to read through these 4 quotes that I identified that I really appreciate as it relates to the work of groups, organizations, and teams. Of the 4, perhaps my favorite is that third one. Individually, we are one drop, and together we are an ocean. When we think about team dynamics, the word that often comes to mind for me is interdependence. I know that this grand rounds is a little bit different than some of the more scientific grand rounds that you're accustomed to, but I know you all understand systems better than many, given your academic specialty. And the interdependence of teams means that if Dr. Sengupta and I are part of the same unit and we're working together, how he shows up impacts me, and how I show up impacts him. That we are jointly engaged in the core activities of the unit, the team, or the organization. And we know that an increasing body of research is being done in multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary, and transdisciplinary teams. I have the pleasure of serving as one of our co-leads for our team science core through the New Jersey ACTS. It's our clinical and translational science entity. And the science of team science continues to grow in popularity. I shared on this slide a quick definition of how the science of team science is defined. When we talk about and think about team science, we typically look at scientific collaborations, research projects, and initiatives that involve more than one individual in a, yes, interdependent fashion. And this can be research that's conducted by small teams and larger groups. So I know many of you on the call are actively engaged in research and likely have been part of MPI funded work or collaborative interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary research, and are engaged in team activities on the clinical side. And when we look at the dynamics of teams, these are some of the considerations that come to mind. What's the research question guiding the team project, and why does it lend itself to a team-based inquiry? What's the subject matter that could benefit from transdisciplinary, or multidisciplinary research? What's the duration of the project? What's the structure of the project? And there are any number of challenges we can run into. So if you're on this call and you're experiencing challenge of some kind related to team dynamics, culture, or communication, you're not alone. Likely each of us run into challenge at any time because teams are interdependent and people can be messy. And these are some of the challenges that the science of team science has identified that can get in the way of effective team performance, particularly as it relates to team-based research. The 2 I would pull out here, first, the diversity of membership. We often are speaking different languages. We're often approaching problems and situations and issues that are informed by our own unique disciplinary orientations, our own unique lived experiences, our own unique expectations and goals. And the other item I'd pull out here is number 7, high task interdependence. Part of the joy of teams is that we get to work with others. Part of the difficulty is that we rely on others in order to do the work we need to do. And so any team presentation that you'd likely sit in would make reference, of course, to Tuckman's model. I really like this figure because it helps to illustrate the evolution of team dynamics. And so I know, having conversations with Dr. Sengupta when he arrived at Rutgers, he was making sense of the dynamics of the team, the dynamics of the culture, the dynamics of the organization. And there's been tremendous change during these 2 years. And I invite you to look at this framework that Tuckman introduced and that's been modified over time to consider where you are in the various team activities you're engaged in today. Do folks still identify as individual contributors unless as part of a core unit or team? Or are you working perhaps in that performing stage where we're open with one another, where we're trusting of one another, and where we're engaged in the shared collective work of the team, one where hierarchy may be of little importance? And so we know that this matters as it relates to team-based research. What does it mean in the clinical setting? I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but the research suggests time and time again that healthcare teams that communicate effectively and work collaboratively reduce the potential for error, resulting in enhanced patient safety and improved clinical performance. Many of you are likely familiar with the Team Steps body of work. If you're not, I would invite you to look into it. It's a great framework and set of tools to improve communication, collaboration, and team dynamics in the healthcare setting. And I ask for you to think for a moment, what are some of the barriers that can get in the way of effective team performance in the clinical side? Just take a moment to reflect. I know you all have had busy, full days already, and embrace the silence for a moment. And I don't know if I'm able to see responses in the chat, but if you're able to type in the chat, I'd love to see what comes to mind for you. What's a challenge that can get in the way of effective performance, communication, collaboration in this clinical environment? So while you're thinking of that and looking at other responses that might come through in the chat, these are some of the items that you may have identified. Some look similar to that list I shared on the previous slide. Lack of time, lack of information sharing, regulations, as someone noted, personal versus collaborative incentives and compensations. Someone shared privately with me this issue of fatigue, workload, lack of role clarity, etc. All right, so you get it, that collaboration and coordination on teams is important, and leadership of these teams is especially important, and that there are any number of challenges that we might run into. So how do we improve? How do we improve? And so I want to share with you a few frameworks, some that come from the business literature, one that comes from our own research in our Office of Organizational Leadership. And the first is a framework that I often turn to. It's very simple in how it's presented. And I also think it sheds great insight on the nature of team dynamics. And it's Lencioni's 5 dysfunctions of a team. And he writes in this book that, like so many other aspects of life, teamwork comes down to mastering a set of behaviors that are at once theoretically uncomplicated, but extremely difficult to put into practice day after day. And I'd say the same for the nature of communication. That because we don't have to think about communication often, because for many of us it comes effortlessly to us, it's easy to take it for granted. But if it were so simple, would we have the kinds of challenges we have as it relates to communication and trust in our units, in our teams, in our families, in our society? So, what are these five dysfunctions? Lencioni defines them as trust, that at the base of high performing teams is a commitment to trust. Great teams trust one another on a fundamental emotional level. We're vulnerable about our weaknesses. He refers to this as vulnerability based trust. And we can be open with one another without filters. I wanted to share two quotes with you from his writing that I really appreciate. One, trust is knowing that when a team member does push you, they're doing it because they care about the team. And the second, remember, teamwork begins by building trust. And the only way to do that is to overcome our need for invulnerability. So, to open yourself up to vulnerability based trust, that's at the heart of high performing teams. The next tier is situated on the topic of conflict. Notice that we don't want to avoid it, but rather we want to engage in it and engage in passionate dialogue around the issues that matter. Do not hesitate to disagree with, challenge, and question one another to find the best answers. Another great quote from his writing: if we don't trust one another, then we aren't going to engage in open, constructive, ideological conflict. And for those of you on the call who would say, this is my greatest weakness, I'm just not good at it, I'm not comfortable with it, it doesn't come naturally to me, know that I'm right there with you. And Lencioni suggests, I don't think anyone ever gets completely used to conflict. If it's not a little uncomfortable, then it's not real. It's not a little uncomfortable, then it's not real. The third is commitment. Commitment. Um, how do we achieve buy-in around the important decisions that the unit needs to make, that the team needs to make in cardiology? And it doesn't necessarily mean consensus, but can we at least understand the criteria by which these decisions are being made? The fourth step is accountability. Great teams hold one another accountable and don't rely on the team leader for accountability, but go directly to their peers. And I think that's really interesting when we think about sort of the nature of organizational leadership, and of course, the different roles and responsibilities that leaders at all levels play in the work of organizational performance. And then lastly, there is a commitment to results, whether it's improving patient safety, whether it's improving workflow, whether it's increasing funds flow, whether it's improving efficiencies. What are the results that are most important to your unit? And to emphasize collective results that define team success. So that's one model. And I invite you to think about, which of the dysfunctions do you tend to encounter most frequently in the various teams and units that you're a part of? Or if we want to approach it from an appreciative inquiry perspective, which of these do you do right? Which of these are hallmarks of success in the various teams and organizations of which you're a part? And so there's been a lot of research conducted on how to achieve high performing academic units, departments, and organizations. And we can learn from the literature across disciplines that's looking at high performing teams to try to better understand which of these are most salient for us in an academic environment and in an academic health environment. And so here's one model. I won't read each of these bullets for you, but I think you can look at some of these and consider which of these contribute most impactfully to the nature of the teams that you're a part of today. And if you're starting to see connections between Lencioni's model and what you're seeing on this slide, that's a good thing because the data is pretty clear. High performing teams trust one another. They have a clear and shared sense of roles and responsibilities. We engage in a regular discipline of feedback in order to improve performance, in order to strengthen accountability, and we're focused on results. And in a second framework that's shared on the next two slides, it repeats much of what you're seeing across the board. Do you trust one another? Again, that's at the foundation. And how do we deepen trust? We open up and create space for vulnerability. We get to know one another. Yes, as scholars, yes, as colleagues, but also as people. Do we understand the goals that we're pursuing? Do we have clarity regarding the tasks that need to be performed? Are we able to diffuse the inevitable tension that we're going to encounter? These are high stakes environments that you work in. When I do work with other units across Rutgers and across higher ed, we sometimes joke, well, you're not doing heart surgery. Well, you all are doing, in some cases, heart surgery, right? You're doing really important, urgent work, and you're helping to ensure the safety and well-being of patients. And of course, that's paramount. And of course, that would contribute to some degree of tension, conflict, and sense of fatigue. Are you taking care of yourself? And are you taking care of your colleagues? And on the next slide, do we have discussions about team performance? And that's why I'm so honored to be here today. And I was so delighted when Dr. Sengupta shared the invitation with me, because my hope is that this will stimulate conversation for you all, that this will provide a foundation. And you can turn to whichever of the concepts I share that best resonate. And you can consider, what might it look like for us to tackle that issue of trust over the next year? What would have to happen for us to take that seriously and to view it as an area of improvement? And how will we measure success? So how will we know if we were effective at trying to increase sense of trust in one another? All right, so I hope all of that is useful for you. I want to shift gears for a moment to share a couple of other concepts that you might be able to turn to individually or collectively. And then I want to make sure we can end by 6:15 or so that we can have some conversation with one another. I'm going to switch to a video here for a moment. Before I share the video, I want to mention that one of the most widely invoked concepts in the team and organizational effectiveness literature these days has been referred to as psychological safety. And in a moment, I'm going to share a quick 3-minute summary of psychological safety with you that Dr. Amy Edmondson provides. She serves as the Novartis Professor of Leadership and Management at the Harvard School of Business. And at the core of psychological safety is this notion that one will not be punished or humiliated for speaking up with ideas, questions, concerns, or mistakes. And that team is safe for interpersonal risk taking. Is safe for interpersonal risk taking. Again, you're probably hearing echoes of having a foundation of trust, leaning into conflict, focusing on accountability and results, and privileging the notion of communication. So let me share a quick video for anyone who's not familiar with psychological safety. She does a nice job of highlighting the core components of it in this brief talk.
One of the most important factors in delivering safe and effective care is psychological safety. Allow me to define that as a belief that the workplace is safe for speaking up with ideas, questions, concerns, and even mistakes. And it's a sense of confidence that your voice is valued. You can think of this as a sense of permission for candor, that the workplace is somewhere where we count on your voice being heard, because you never know when you will have had the observation that someone else missed that will be mission critical to delivering safe, high quality care. Now, I want to be clear that psychological safety is not about being nice. It's not about holding back on something you think might be unpleasant. In fact, quite the opposite. It's about candor. It's also, of course, not freedom from conflict. When you're in a psychologically safe workplace, there will be conflict. People will have different points of view, and we'll get into it, and we'll seek to understand each other's views better and come out with a better solution. Psychological safety and a psychologically safe workplace doesn't mean that all of your ideas will be applauded. And it's certainly not permission to slack off. It's not a license to whine. It's not oversharing. We still want people to be thoughtful and considerate in sharing work relevant content. And important to mention, psychological safety isn't the goal. Psychological safety is a means to the goal, and that goal is excellence. That goal is commitment to high quality care. So it's important to recognize that for really high quality care, you need not just psychological safety, you also need urgency and commitment to excellence. If you don't have either psychological safety or a commitment to excellence, then you are working what I call the apathy zone, where your heart isn't in it, you don't much like your colleagues, and you're just not giving the work what you could give it. And certainly if all you had was psychological safety and no commitment to excellence, then you'd be in what we call the comfort zone, where it's quite a relaxed state of affairs. I know that that's not characterizing care delivery today. However, this is the one that worries me. When your commitment to excellence and your sense of urgency are high, but psychological safety is low, I call that the interpersonal anxiety zone, where your commitment to excellence is thwarted by not feeling that your voice is welcome. So finally, if you have both psychological safety and a commitment to excellence, that's the learning zone, that's the high performance zone. That's where problems get solved day in and day out, especially in healthcare delivery.
All right, I hope that was helpful. And one of the reasons why I love to share that version of her brief talk is because I have no doubt that each of you on the call are committed to excellence. You wouldn't be in the roles you're in today if you weren't committed to excellence. Excellent in your research, excellent in delivering the very finest patient care, excellent in contributing to the mission of our institution. And I want to reiterate what she said, that psychological safety isn't just about being nice. When we talk about building high performing teams and developing environments of trust, it's not just about being nice with one another, but it's about giving intentional thought to communication design so that we can take issues related to culture and climate and communication seriously. In my book that's coming out, actually, Dr. Sengupta mentioned it in my post-crisis leadership book. It comes out this week. We talk about the importance of resilience and renewal in the aftermath of disruption. And that resilience is to bounce back to what once was. And that renewal is about the healing that's made possible as we embark on a journey we perhaps never would have considered prior to the crisis itself. And so I hope that notion of resilience and renewal is useful for you as you think about how can you lean upon what this unit, what your team stands for when you encounter setback, when you encounter conflict, when you encounter challenge or crisis, and how can you take healing seriously by privileging the notion of communication. And that's where I want to sort of land this plane in this talk is really around this issue of communication. My doctorate, as Dr. Sengupta mentioned, is in communication. And by the way, for anyone who wants to read more about Edmondson's framework, her book is really good. It's called The Fearless Organization, and I put the cover here for you in case you're not familiar with it or haven't seen it. So communication. When you hear the word communication, when you saw that today's grand rounds was going to be on the subject of communication in relationship to org excellence, this might be where your mind's turned. Communication, it's different than some of the research that you're hearing about typically in cardiology grand rounds, because we tend to think about communication in a really simple, limited, linear kind of way. That we have messages that we deliver to receivers with some desired effect. And I can't tell you how many leaders I work with who are struck by the fact that their message wasn't received when they shared it in that one-on-one meeting or when they put it in that email. Because communication isn't happening in this linear, prescriptive transmission model. Rather, as this visual attempts to illustrate, and we talk more about this in an article that we published in the Journal of Leadership and Organizational Development, communication is messy, it's complex, and it's happening within a system. So there's the message you want to send, and there's the message that's received. And it's happening within a context that's filled with a lot of noise. Think about the clinical environments in which you work. Think about your environments when you're working across organizations. I know we have folks from Rutgers and from Barnabas who are here today and others. So working across organizations and entities, we have issues related to power that are shaping how messages are received and the history of the relationship. That context can shape how messages are received. So this slide attempts to illustrate the complexity of communication. And if you want to get better at building trust, if you want to get better at building a culture of psychological safety, if you want to improve organizational excellence, I invite you to take seriously the role that communications play for each of you as individuals and for the collective organization. This slide just highlights a couple of key principles, some of which are adapted from Watzlawick et al.'s seminal piece on communication axioms. When we think about communication, we're really talking about the behavior and experience of people actively engaged in the process of creating meaning. And our intent as communicators doesn't always equal the impact. And just because it didn't have the impact it might have, that doesn't minimize the impact, even if we had the best of intentions. And that's pretty widely discussed in a lot of these books on difficult conversations. And so the three axioms of many that I pulled out from Watzlawick et al.'s piece is that we cannot not communicate. Everything we do is communicative. Even the act of staying silent when we see some sort of injustice communicates something pretty profound. Secondly, focus on the content of what's being said and the nature of the relationships. Again, power is at play in any communicative moment. And lastly, take communication seriously because it's inevitable, it's going to happen, it's irreversible. So once we put it out there, it's hard to take it back, and it's unrepeatable. And I love that unrepeatable piece because it reminds us of sort of how sacred these communication moments are. The words you use matter. And I know you know that in your conversations with patients and with caretakers and with members of the community. your words carry meaning. So the last thing I want to share with you all is a diagnostic that we use in our office. As Dr. Sengupta was describing my bio, I love how he said, I know people at the university, because a lot of what I'm doing is just sort of in circles at the university, helping to support leaders across Rutgers and helping our organization be more effective. And often I'll have leaders come to me saying, I need to talk, we're having an issue. And typically the issues involving something related to people, culture, communication. And what we've realized from having a lot of these conversations in our office is that the issue sometimes reflects one of these circles. And when we're trying to improve culture, we're trying to focus on one or several of these dimensions. And these are important because they come to be fundamental to the way an organization is viewed by its employees and others. And on this slide, and again, you'll have access to the content, this is a breakdown of the kinds of considerations we might consider for each of those variables. Is attention given to each employee and each employee group? Are work standards high? Is there clarity regarding the decisions that are made? Do we have a supportive climate? What about meetings? Are they well run? Is there a clear agenda? Is there appropriate follow-up done at the conclusion of the meeting? I don't know how this relates for you all, but I know I spend a big bulk of my day in meetings. And if those meetings are not effective, it can really be a wear on the day. Change practices that are careful, intentional, and conscientious. And of course, leadership practices that are people-centered, principle-centered, and process-centered. So my invitation to you all is to focus on the dimensions of this presentation that resonate most clearly with where you are today. This was meant to be fundamental and foundational. So I could go into more research in some of these areas in a follow-up conversation, but I hope that this sort of sets the stage for how you might consider collaboration, communication, and coordination in the work you all are doing. I call out the division of cardiovascular diseases and hypertension here, but this can be for across the units that are represented on the call. Have collaborative conversations, maybe in response to today's talk. Which of these items are a strength for us? And which of these might we want to improve upon? What I love about this notion of high performing teams is that we are all works in progress. There is no perfect organization. So even for the most high performing of our academic units, there's still room for growth. That's the pursuit of excellence. Second is look inward. How are your communication practices contributing to the culture, climate, and coordination of this team and other teams of which you're a part? How are you being perceived? And what can you do differently to try to get to some of the goals that you have for yourself professionally? And lastly, identify strategies for leveraging talents. What are your individual talents and what are the collective talents of the different teams that you're a part of? This is really important for team science and team-based research. It's important for having a culture of psychological safety, and it's important for the pursuit of excellence. So that's my content. Right on time, Dr. Sengupta, at 6:15. I would love to hear questions. I did see there was maybe some things raised in the chat as well. If you have any questions, comments, insights, I'd love to answer them. And if it's okay, I did receive one question in the chat directly to me, so I can start with that one, Dr. Sengupta.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So this person shared with me, how do you deal with a situation where the team leader might be where team leader or team leaders are contributing to perhaps toxic work environment? How do individual team players bring this up so something great can be achieved? I appreciate that question because first, leadership happens at all levels. So regardless of where you sit and the work you're engaged in, to consider the questions you might raise to invite some introspection around team dynamics. All right, so posing it as questions rather than accusations can be a place to start. I know from my conversations with Dr. Sengupta, one of the reasons for even having this as a focus for your grand rounds is because of an openness to want to have conversations like this. So, regardless of where you sit across the different organizations that are represented here today, to raise questions, to pose visioning questions like what would happen if we did X, Y, or Z can really help to stimulate some creative thinking around this. And another thing I've seen work really well is to not just present the issues, but to go with a set of solutions in mind. This is really at the heart of like managing up. So if you see that the director you report to, the whomever it is that you're reporting up to, is engaged in practices that perhaps aren't as effective as they might think they are, or are contributing to some issues related to culture or climate, bring up the issue using I statements, and then post some solutions so you can co-construct a response to it. So for the person that shared that, I hope that's helpful and relates to some of what we've been talking about today.
So there are some questions coming up. I think Dr. Barrett has raised a question. Can you comment on any data on the performance of diverse versus more homogeneous team? And number two, tactics for improved communication within diverse teams.
Yes, a great question, Dr. Barrett. In the chat, I'm putting a link to our publication that was just released in Journal of Clinical and Translational Science. Because what's interesting is that we draw upon this a little bit in terms of the lit review for this and some of the findings that let me read one of the quotes to you for a moment. Yeah, so this is one of the pieces that we highlight. We did not find any correlation between team interdisciplinary diversity and team effectiveness in this particular study. And what I want to emphasize, I think, as it relates to the question you posed, is having a highly heterogeneous, diverse team can certainly be an asset to team effectiveness. But it's not enough to just be diverse. It's not enough to just bring diverse perspectives together. But we have to be intentional with how we harness that. We have to be intentional in terms of how that diversity is meaningfully leveraged. We need to be mindful of the ways in which that diversity, diverse disciplinary orientations, diverse lived experiences, we're seeing a lot around multi-generational teams right now where this is coming up a lot. How can we engage in effective group performance by leveraging the different intergenerational approaches, goals, expectations that we might engage in? And so the tactics to improve communications within diverse teams, one, take stock of the diversity. Take a look at the diversity of the team, the different talents, different backgrounds, different disciplines. Two, think about when you're at your best as a team. I love appreciative inquiry. Let's learn from some of those success stories and then think about how we can reverse engineer future situations that draw upon those successes. And third is zoom out and use the team and the diversity of the team as an opportunity for inquiry. So at the end of the semester, I know I was talking to Dr. Sengupta earlier, this is sort of a nice time to begin to introduce this. And I know through December, you're also going to be talking more about this, to collectively sort of zoom out and take stock of where we are and where do we want to get better. And just by opening up space for that conversation, it can really strengthen diverse team effectiveness.
So I'm going to pose a question, and because we are a large crowd here. So 3 years back when I started, I was amazed by the diversity of as you mentioned, the units, different units, the health system, the school, and the hospital, and so many new people, right? And as you correctly pointed out, that everybody is so talented. I almost felt like as we're in a journey which is just beginning, maybe some of the reason there is a lack of coherence of understanding is because maybe it's a new journey. I mean, it takes time. What is an in this trying to bring coherence? How do you as you're mentioning? I mean I do not know if there is a way to do it organizationally, um, uh, than to stick to the spirit of what you think is right, and then maybe keep on tweaking it a bit, taking feedback, because you cannot really make large scale changes, and you can only change so much which is within in your territory to be able to change. You cannot change everyone. But how have people coped up with so much of transitions that have happened within the Rutgers and the environment around?
Wow, it's a great question, Dr. Sengupta, and it's one that we think a lot about because there's been no shortage of change these last couple of years. And as we look towards the future, I could imagine a world where that change is going to only become accelerated, right? As healthcare changes, as academic health centers change, as higher ed changes, as our society changes. We've had some big shifts in the national election that from this last week. So I'm sure there will be changes that we're going to face. So a couple of things, Dr. Sengupta. One, there's likely going to be a natural resistance to any kind of change. And that resistance is likely going to be heightened in traditional organizations, in organizations that have already been high performing because we're rooted in a set of practices that have worked for us for some time. So I think that resistance can be due to not understanding the need for it, to fear of what the change might produce, um, to the a potential concern for how it might impact one's lived experience, right? So I think the first is to know that that resistance is likely to be pretty typical in most organizations. Two, to take stock of the readiness of the team. So what's the journey been like for them so far? Where are we now? You mentioned the journey, right, earlier. Where are you now in that journey? And where are there opportunities for increased growth, change, innovation that might lie ahead? And what might those opportunities have in store for your colleagues? That's so identifying like what's in it for others becomes part of the value proposition for engaging in change. And the third is I always encourage folks that are thinking about change and reinvention, these impact people. So adopting people-centered practices when we're engaged in any kind of change is critical. So actively listening, gathering appropriate data so that we can be intentional with the change we're trying to produce, thinking about a desired future state that could help to solve some of the problems that team members continue to bring up as pain points. If that ideal future state can make people's lives a little bit easier, can double down on the mission for what you stand for, can improve patient care, let's use that as the catalyst for the change. So that's some of what I have in mind, Dr. Sengupta. I could talk to you for a while more about
Yeah.
this.
No, I was just bringing it because I think what I'm trying to tell is probably sometimes it's our perception of someone behaving in a certain ways, just because I think we are all differently coming from different angles, and it comes. There's a question there, and then I have one more. Are there
Sure.
particular leadership styles that are best suited for healthcare teams and organizations?
The short answer is probably not. And a lot of the research on leadership styles, behaviors, attitudes, the general thinking is that there is no one best style. But what's more important is adapting the style to the needs of the situation or context of which you're a part. So I think that's a short way of responding to your question. I think for healthcare teams and organizations, and I'm most familiar on the academic health side, um, the pressures are immense. The pressures are immense, and the mission areas are each critical to the organization. The teaching mission, the clinical mission, community engagement mission, the research mission. So to think about what are the ways in which we can engage others in the collective work that needs to be done as we advance excellence in each of those mission areas, figuring out which of your talents you can draw upon to do that meaningfully, and recognizing what your individual team, department, division, institution need. Try to well calibrate those. Um, but I don't think you can go wrong by being thoughtful, by being curious, by again being compassionate in your approach. It's hard to imagine an environment where that will steer you wrong.
So I have an important question, and a lot of your colleagues are from internal medicine and who are hospitalists who might have also joined. So now we are communicating with a lot of people asynchronously through notes, or we do sometimes like epic chats. Now, what has been your research that I was particularly struck by your slide that what you're trying to communicate and what ends up getting understood is different. What is your research in terms of when we are communicating in our epic notes or through our chats? Do people really get it? Or I have my bias. Like I typically pick up the phone and try to call them because I've sometimes seen that communication is not just words or lines. Sometimes you're actually actively changing your intent of what you want to write. It's not passive, it's an active communication style because you change what you say or state to a person based upon their own inquiry that happens within a short period of time, whether they understood or not understood. Do you think these epic notes are able to communicate? Because this is a very big central question in a quest for personalized medicine. Uh, do you think we should still do what we write or pick up the phone and talk? I have some ideas, but I worry a lot because if you're going to sign out based upon a certain notes to a provider, will that note do that, or should that be more personalized with the communication through? Sometimes you talk, tell, and did you get that? I mean, you do affirmative. You affirm you try to question and query the person understood you. That sometimes does not exist in notes. What do you think about that?
Yeah, so this is not my area of research, but I think it's a fascinating question. I know that there's a lot of study that's being done in health communication, Dr. Sengupta, to get at exactly this issue you're suggesting. And I know in an applied way, many of you, all of you are living through this right now in terms of just like how the technology and tools have influenced how and the extent to which we communicate. A couple of things that stand out to me, and I'm not an epic expert. One, the message sent may not always be the message that's received. So even if we have the best of intentions when we're communicating through notes, it might not be received, it might not be interpreted, it might not be understood in the ways that we intend. And so I think that there's inherent limitations when we're engaging in one form of communication through one media channel, be it epic in this particular setting. Two, triangulating messages is often the better strategy. So thinking about, as you're suggesting, we can use notes, but then follow it up with a call, an email, an in-person conversation. If the problems and if the processes and policies allow for that, I think in many cases, the more you can communicate around it can ensure that the message sent is the message received. And the third is to try to put yourself in the shoes of your audience when you're sending these messages via notes, to try to better understand how I could deliver this message with more clarity, given what my goals are.
So now
Uh,
I'm bringing, Ralph, sorry for interrupting, but I just want to bring up another complexity. Now we're going and adapting to AI and asking it to transcribe and change our conversation. I worry a lot. I mean, I am an AI enthusiast, but the purity of the message that you're trying to communicate, and now you're going to take help of. And if you're finally going to be the person editing it and sending the content, that's fine. But what if it's an unedited content that goes out and the message is completely different?
wow. Um, it's such an important and challenging issue, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's changing the nature of human communication. It's
Yeah.
changing the nature of human communication. And as you know better than so many, Dr. Sengupta, the affordances of the technology can be life-changing, right? I know you're leaning into AI and robotics as you think about the care for cardiology, right? And it poses threats to and
Yes.
limitations for the nature of human communication. And so I
Yes.
think the writing on affordances theory in communication technology is probably the best way for me to answer that question, that the technology itself isn't good or bad, but rather it creates affordances and ways of acting that can help us to be more effective, and it might offer constraints as well. And if we lose the humanity in our interactions, that seems to be a sort of shallow place to be for us as a civilization.
I agree with you. And I worry a lot because now we are going to nuance and scripts and AI tools that are transcribing. And I worry it could lead to artificial conflicts. And so like I'm writing a note and then it goes to one of my colleagues in internal medicine and and if it's configured by an AI chat, I worry a little bit about what it could. And these are important questions. Perhaps these are area of research.
I think that's fascinating. Well, it raises ethical questions. It raises questions around communication efficacy. Yeah, well, I'm intrigued, Dr. Sengupta.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and it's coming, but it's coming. It's coming and I know that companies are there around who are trying
absolutely.
to with making this work. Um, any other questions, anyone? Please feel free to unmute yourself, um, and ask. So maybe I will bring up how do we? You mentioned about people are scared of asking questions because there is always in a hierarchical organization a power, like, or even for example our trainees, right? um, the trainees may not have a freedom or a feeling of insecurity when they are asking a question which may be work related. How do we overcome that, or how in general you make it? I mean, you can make the environment friendly, or what is it? What is a toolkit people can use when suddenly they encounter people who are having difficulties in raising the bar of inquiry?
It's a great question. Remember that slide earlier? I said the power is at play in any communication moment. So I think for especially trainees on the call, I would encourage you to lean into the discomfort of asking those questions, but to do so from a strategic place. So, you want to be vulnerable, but you also want to be sensitive to sort of how you're putting yourself forward in these situations. And so I think some general principles that I think could be useful. One is to read the room, to consider what are some of those moments where I can speak up more actively even in positions where I'm less senior than some of my faculty colleagues. Second, um, to find safe spaces or lower risk settings where you can experiment with this, right? So maybe in a clinical setting where you're dealing with sort of a fast-paced, more urgent environment, raising questions there or posing challenge or challenging some of what's happening might be a little bit less comfortable. Find safer environments to experiment. I call those mini laboratories for leadership, right? Think about where those opportunities could be. And they might even be outside of the workplace as a starting point for you. And third is to discuss this with whomever you report to find out sort of what does success look like for you in terms of how I can, I have goals and wanted to speak up a little bit more actively or raise questions that could try to help us rethink things in a certain way. Can you talk a little bit about your comfort level in having me do that? So try to align what you're doing with how others are judging your success. I think those three general principles might be a place to start.
Great. All right. I think, thank you very much. I think those resource toolkits are wonderful, and we look forward to
Great.
exercising them. And I think this month is going to have a series of lectures and workshops on communication. I think next we are also planning in December to have a patient communication series with some workshop. in general, these are new times, and as we mentioned, I think it's not uncommon for leaders or even people here, even if you're not a leader, to find yourself in a very uncomfortable situation or unusual situation. But I believe that the journey is just started, and we are here to learn from how to make the best from the environment that we are in together.
That's great. I admire the work you all do, and just want to say thank you for your commitment to this critical mission. And thank you, Dr. Sengupta, for the invitation to join you all.
And if anyone has any residual question, I'm sure that you will find Dr. Gigliotti very resourceful to be able to answer them. So Ralph, is it okay? You want to share your email? I
Please,
don't
I
want
just
you to have a barrage of email.
no,
I'm
not
sure
at
you will
all.
inspire a lot of people, and I'm just encouraging people to search their solution and find what their missions are, and in a proactive way, rather than waiting for some action to happen on its own, right? So I think we just need to be creative and proactive and find our solutions to our own issues.
I love that. My email's in the chat. If anyone wants to contact me, I'm always happy to connect.
Thank you very much.
You
Thank
got it.
you.
My pleasure.
Have
Take
a good.
care.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.